everyone. I'm Lora Hypnosis, certified hypnotist, clairvoyant, and channel, and welcome back to another video. So for today, I thought it'd be interesting to share some stories of past lives that I have recalled from my own experience. I just recently did a past life regression workshop at Roots to Crown in St. Pete, and it was so fun to share this modality with so many other people, like how hypnosis works, what it allows you to access, how we're accessing these subconscious factors, including our long-term and past life memories in a hypnotic state. But more especially what I'm excited to share with you today, if you didn't already catch it with the intro title, is some of the spicier past lives I've been able to remember. And essentially, I want to share this so that I can also share what lessons I've learned subsequently as a result of remembering these past lives. So, if you have any further questions, feel free to drop comments down below and I'll see what comes up as a result of this. But let's dive right in. So, first off, I'll share a little bit about what came to be, like how I got to these places with these memories intact. Because for me, when I first discovered hypnosis, I was I think I was about 20 years old. And at that point in time, it was intriguing, but I didn't have upbringing to understand the ramifications behind recalling past lives. So being introduced to hypnosis changed the game for me. And so when my first ever hypnosis session occurred, and I believe I dove into the story a little bit in one of my previous videos, so check those out on my YouTube channel. But nonetheless, I remembered everything that occurred in my first ever hypnosis session. And I remembered the words and the verbiage the hypnotist used for me to access those deeper states of consciousness. So when I remembered it all, I applied that to my personal meditations at home. And one of my favorite places to remember or dive into this practice of self-hypnosis ended up just being in the shower, because that was the easiest place for me to have like one-on-one time and like totally get zenned out and not worry about who was around, what was going on, and just totally like get into this wonderful flow state. So I would say it was probably less than a year or so after my first ever session that one particular past life memory came through and struck a strong chord with me in various ways. So at this point in time, I was in a monogamous long-term relationship. Well, at that point, I think we were together about 2 years, give or take. And I was looking for commitment from this person. So at this point, and we had already moved in together, we were living together. At this point, when I remembered this particular lifetime, it gave me so much more context and clarity about what patterns I was repeating in a lot of ways with my partner at the time. So the past life itself, the memories, it was a lifetime in ancient Mesopotamia. And for me, the first thing that came through was seeing the entryway to my home. Initially, I didn't know it was Mesopotamia at first, but I received guidance as I went along. And what I mean by that, when I receive guidance, I personally have a reference guide, who I identify as my spirit guide, helping answer a lot of questions that I have along the way when I review these past lives. So she was able to be a reference point for me to answer certain questions I had with the visuals and the memories that were coming through for me. So this past life in ancient Mesopotamia, I've remembered the entryway to my home. I remembered the architecture, the type of home it was. It had a mud sort of stucco look to the outside. And when I entered the home, I was able to see the rest of the layout of the initial entryway into the dwelling, which is a big open space. I remember there being some pottery, different strewn about throughout the space, different wooden tables, and there was really beautiful textiles. What I mean, like tapestries and rugs. Like they were very vibrant tapestries going on that we had at different places throughout the home. But everything else was natural materials like mud and wood and clay. But still had a really beautiful flair to it in its own way. Like it was created, it was very homey. The next portion of this is I was in this memory. Now, in the hypnotic state, you are fully in control. And for me, I was able to navigate the exploration of the home and find what I wanted to in that space. So from there, I would explore the different rooms that were here. And it wasn't that there was a ton of different rooms, but one interesting part was that there was like a narrow, not a narrow hallway, but maybe more, I want to call it more like a cubby hole that had an opening and had a ladder that went through it. So I was able to go into this little hall, this little cubby hole of a hall, climb this little wooden ladder up to a loft of sorts. But it didn't necessarily have any windows. What was up there was the bedding for my little brother up there. And at this point in time, I was able to also kind of check in and see and recall what I physically looked like. And it seemed to be that I was about 16 or 17 years old. And my brother, who was there, was about 12 years old, give or take. And he was up in the loft in his bed up there, and I recalled meeting him up there and recognizing he was a sickly little boy. And it seemed I was also kind of like also receiving knowing, like there was a knowledge, like I was wondering like where our parents were, and then a knowing came through, understanding they weren't there most of the time because they were so busy out working and trying to make ends meet to pay for medicines to help take care of my little brother. So they were working all the time. And at this point, because I'm a teenager at that life, I was trying to figure out what else I could be doing to help support them and him, because I loved him so much. I wanted to ensure that he was thriving, that he could move on, that he could live a life. And so one of the things that I thought was a solution that I felt inspired to do was become a, I don't want this to get banned or like removed. Eggs. Eggs with an S at the beginning. That's the word I'll use so that this video doesn't get taken down. I was a eggs worker. Like, we'll be dancing around this. So if you know, you'll follow as best we can through this story. So I was an eggs worker to try to make ends meet. Now, what was interesting was that that's what I thought I had to do. I didn't feel like I was qualified for anything else. I didn't feel like I had any knowledge or abilities to work through this or to find other means. So that seemed to be the easiest thing. So I did that, and I did not enjoy it from the memories. Like, it was not a pleasant experience. It was just something I thought I had to do, again, to try to support. I don't think I told my family. I don't think I let them know what I was up to or how things were coming through. But nonetheless, that was what I did. And I do remember with certain clients meeting them in an alleyway in the town. And I had a basic setup. I had some tapestries, again, a rug that had a really interesting woven design in it that was like my area to work at. And the one thing that I focused on in order to kind of get through each client was like I focused on the design in the rug. Like, that was beautiful to me. That was something that was captivating, and it helped me kind of just get the job done. So yeah, that was something I did, but nonetheless, unfortunately, it was not enough. I did not make enough money, could not have saved my little brother in that lifetime. He still passed away before he was even, it seemingly, 13. And I carried a lot of regret and guilt for not having been able to save him. I was putting all that pressure on me. And after his passing, I don't remember being close with my parents, or I don't remember them at all after that point. so I believe I just kind of continued doing my work because that's just what I figured I could do at that point. And I lived to be about somewhere in my 40s, continuously doing this work, but not living a happy and fulfilled life. And again, it was predominantly overshadowed by the guilt I carried from the passing of my little brother. And so eventually, I remember walking into a nearby body of water and essentially trying to myself. And as I entered the water, now this is an interesting thing with hypnosis and past life regression. When you get to the final moments of a life, there are emotions that might be prevalent and present, but there is actual no pain or discomfort in the actual transition. That is a recurring thing that many people who explore past life regression work identify, that you don't experience the discomfort of the actual passing. And so I did not recognize any discomfort other than my emotions in this particular passing as well. Essentially, as I entered the water and I'm transitioning, I was crying. And logically speaking, I understand that it's like, I can't be crying like this under the water. I must have already transitioned. And sure enough, my spirit guide shows up to me in the water at this moment in time, and she begins to console me. She's like cradling me, holding me under the water and trying to comfort me as I'm sobbing. And I'm again sobbing about the grief that I carried. And I'm just like crying my eyes out, and she's telling me, she's like, honey, you could not have saved him. Like, you couldn't save him any more than you could save the world. And from there, I bursted out and I was like, if I'm not meant to save the world, what am I meant to be doing here? And she simply said calmly, she's like, you're meant to teach. And at that point, I was like, me teach? Who am I to teach? What do you mean by that? Like, it made no sense to me at the time whatsoever. But she kind of left it at that. Left it for me to kind of take that information and do what I will with it. So subsequently, after that, I started, once I got myself out of the hypnotic state and I had time to reflect on that lifetime, those memories, I started to navigate them and dive deeper and like, what does that mean to teach? What does that mean for me specifically to teach? Because I didn't think that was something, I never considered myself a teacher. I never wanted to be a teacher. I was like, what am I doing? But ultimately, I realized that over the years since I had discovered hypnosis, how transformative it had been for me. And a lot of the revelations I had been actualizing and realizing through it was a huge healing modality. And my takeaway from her sharing with me that I meant to teach was that I meant to share with the world that this is another option of healing for people. This is another avenue people can explore for self-awareness. And it can be very powerful at that. And even further, connecting this to my relationship at the time, I could recognize that my partner at the time was my little brother from that past life. And there was an interesting pattern that I carried around with. I was constantly paranoid of losing them, and not just losing them, but them getting ill. Like, so worried about them not taking care of themselves, not eating right or doing this and that, and just being paranoid about their well-being. Like, since the beginning of us getting close, I could recognize like those feelings of anxiousness and paranoia behind wanting him to be well. So me recalling that particular past life and recognizing that that was something I harbored from that lifetime and how it impacted this current life in our dynamic was really a big deal for me. It was a big deal to recognize that that was something that was impacting me. And I did a little further work afterwards to process that further so that I could release that anxiety, so that I didn't have to carry that any longer in association with this partner that I had. I wanted to be free of that. It's not to say I didn't want their well-being to still be well, but I didn't have to carry those heavier feelings to and projected into the current relationship. So I was able to absolve that further. So that was really, really beautiful and healing for me on my part with that. So then that was essentially one of the main past life memories that I experienced. And that, again, that last message that my spirit guide gave me, that really brought me to a point of wanting to pursue hypnosis professionally. So I was able to do that. And it's been history ever since. And I'm so grateful for the opportunities I have been given and the clients I've been able to see and work with over time, and the profound healing they've also been working through on their own through past life regression work. So additionally, yes, that was one of the first sex life, eggs life memories, the spicy memories that I was able to recall through past life regression. Now, another interesting one was tied to Japan, where I recalled being a Japanese geisha. And with that, it was not all about the eggs work. This is going to be a funny video. Thank you for bearing with this. This was not about the eggs work in that lifetime explicitly. That was a factor of being a geisha, but that lifetime was more ceremonious. And in hindsight, being able to take away from that lifetime, I could see that there was grander lessons behind me embodying that, where I was, my consciousness, my soul, whatever you want to call it, that was experiencing that reincarnation, was trying to make peace with eggs work altogether, because it was so unpleasant for me in that other lifetime. And so there was a lot more ceremony. There was a lot more reverence in this work. So with this, I don't remember much of my upbringing, but I do believe that I was introduced to basically the house that would become the inn that I would receive clients through, that I would work as a geisha through. I believe I entered in that place at a fairly young age. Give or take being a preteen or so. Like, I think that was pretty standard. And it's harder for me to pinpoint a time when this, what year this was, when this transpired. But I received the feeling that this was more what we would call like the medieval, well, I want to say like the 1500s, maybe 1600s in Japan. And it was so fascinating. Gosh, it got me intrigued in researching more and more about Japanese culture, that's for sure. Now, I'm still no expert, but I can only share what I did remember. From there, I would see, as I got older, I was trained more formally. I didn't necessarily take on clients right away early on in me being trained. I believe the term for it is like when you're a Maiko or Mako. It is like the beginning learning stages of geisha. But as I got older and eventually did become a geisha, I also continued to, I was finally old enough and ready to take on clients. So we would entertain clients. We would be a companion for them when they wanted to drink and eat a meal. And I was trained I could play musical instruments. I could do fan dances. There was a sense of artistry with just being. That was the beauty behind that life, was like everything, every movement, there was artistry behind it. So all that reverence that was put into it made me have like no resistance to the admiration of the work itself. So again, a lot more healing was happening as a result of that, like in comparison to like the unpleasantness I experienced in the other lifetime. So one of my favorite clients that I would see regularly, again, I recognize as my monogamous partner from the lifetime that I just spoke of. The partner I was with that had also been my younger brother. He also ended up being connected with me in this Japanese lifetime as well. So from there, he was one of my regulars, and eventually, like very quickly, he was able, I believe he was a samurai, and he had means. He had a good amount of, he had some sense of stability enough to be able to pay to almost exclusively see me. So I wouldn't have to see any other clients other than him. And I preferred it that way. We were having like an active romance. It was crossing that threshold beyond the clientele dynamic. Like I was in love with him. And so it was beautiful to see that it's like he respected that this was my life, that was my life, that was the way I lived, like as a geisha, but he loved me and wanted to be with me. So he made it doable. He made it so. And I wasn't opposed to it. We had essentially over time made plans to he wanted to marry me so that we could stay together and I wouldn't have to continue that work, and it would be us together for the rest of our lives. That was the plan. Event that didn't end up planning out though. What ultimately happened is that this led to the ending days of my life as well. What I recognized, or at least what the memory came through, I remember being at the end, but we had like an outdoor onsen of sorts, like which is a hot springs. So we had a outdoor bathing unit area, but it was blocked off by shrubbery, bramble bushes, so thorny bushes, to prevent anybody from looking in that wasn't supposed to be. That was their security, essentially. Like make it with thorns. And I remember expecting him to return. Like there was one. I was out there in the onsen when I knew we had plans. Like I was expecting him to arrive to the inn shortly for our evening. And I remember as I'm in the onsen, I overhear a commotion not very far on the other side of the bushes near a pathway that was a few feet away. And I could hear his voice of my partner. Like I could hear him, and I remember like listening and it's like, oh, it sounds like he's with someone else. What's going on? And listening in and recognizing there's another male talking to him. But it sounded threatening. I don't remember the context of what they were speaking of or what the conversation was that they were having, but I remember feeling a sense of urgency, like, oh no, what's going to happen? I have to save him. And I remember shoving myself through whatever could have been the most accessible point through the bushes, the bramble bushes, getting scratched up, trying to push my way through to cut through to get to him. And in the midst of me like pushing through, I ultimately didn't realize that I was creating a distraction for my partner. And in that moment of distraction, whoever he was confronting or whoever was confronting him, he was taken down. And again, I'm tiptoeing around the verbiage of this lightly, so for the sake of this video being on YouTube and the algorithm. But the opposing, there was an opposing samurai there that took my partner down. And again, the grief, the heartache from that came through so pointedly. And the other samurai, I don't even remember what happened at that point, where he went, what happened. I was so distraught with the grief that I was inconsolable at that moment. And I don't even know if I had a robe on or what happened. But again, everything became so jumbled at that point because I witnessed my partner getting taken down. And from there, I don't know, the next thing that I do remember, someone somehow must have found us or found me, took me back to my room, tried to tend to the scratches that I had incurred from my pushing through the bushes and the discomfort that someone tried to tend to me, to take care of me. But essentially, I remember laying in my futon where I was and realizing like my heart was broken. My heart was completely broken from that, from the loss of him and all the future that represented, that I had no more of a will to live at that point. And so I don't remember fully what the transition was like for me at that point. I just remember that awareness and not being able to remember anything else past that point. So that one definitely, I mean, both lifetimes thus far that I've shared, definitely carried some heaviness. But it further emphasized that theme and fear of loss with that same partner that I had. So I continuously was being presented another opportunity to release another layer of the fear of loss, and recognizing it's like, if I'm operating out of fear, then I'm projecting more and more fear into my reality. And that is not helpful. That is not helpful at all. If we're operating out of fear, guess what? What we focus on is amplified. So fear becomes amplified, and I am manifesting more things to be fearful of. But again, particularly around that theme of loss was a big one for me to process and work through, so that wasn't dictating me showing up authentically in our current life connection. So eventually I did, when I finally released that, I was no longer afraid to lose him. I could actually be present with him, and I could actually be here now and analyze our relationship in new ways. And eventually, we were together a total 5 years in this lifetime. And eventually I recognized that, not without love, I deeply love and respect him, but I was recognizing incompatibilities with our dynamic. And again, I was no longer operating out of fear of losing him. So now I could choose, does this work for me to stay with this person, or is it more in alignment for me to move on? And trust that, like, again, I don't have to fear a loss. We are never alone. There's so much support and love out there from the universe that I could trust that there was going to be more connections coming forth for me in this lifetime. So eventually I did decide to leave that relationship, again, with as much love and respect as I could for that person. Again, there was so much I learned about myself through being with him, and I admired all that love and support still to this day. But since then, moving on, there was another lifetime that has had interesting, it's come back full circle in a lot of ways for me, even at this current juncture in my life. So let me preface this, because I'm curious with some of you. Many people are familiar with the practice of Tantra, and I want to elaborate a little bit more of what that means to me, because by no means I'm not a Tantra facilitator, but it is an intriguing practice to work with and study. Tantra is a concept of working with life's energies. We have chakras throughout our body system, and most people are familiar with the 7 main chakras, where it's your crown chakra, your third eye, your throat chakra, your heart chakra, your solar plexus, and then, forgive me, I'm spacing now on the next one. It's just above the root. So the solar plexus, sound out. Feel free, comment down below which the orange, what the orange chakra is above your root chakra. I'm spacing on it right now, so bear with me. Thank you. But all these chakra systems are a part of your energy field. And if any of them are blocked, you're not necessarily living your life to the fullest. But that also includes our sexuality. Put an S in front of that and you'll get it. We don't want to exclude that, because that is a part of being human. That is a part of the human experience. So with that, there are many cultures around the world that still practice these, like activating it or working with all of these energy centers, not excluding our lower chakras. So recently, in this past year or so, that's been opening up more and more for me. There have been wonderful people I've connected with that are Tantra facilitators, that have shared so many great opportunities in working through understanding oneself through the teachings of Tantra, or Tantric teachings, because there are many ways of looking at it and practicing it. So from there, I wanted to give that little prelude to bringing in the next lifetime story that I'd like to share. After I left my last long-term relationship, the one I spoke of already, very shortly after our separation, I was able to recall another lifetime that was very tantric in a lot of ways. However, it was somewhere what I could identify as Celtic, or somewhere like in what would be present day Scotland or Ireland even. It could, somewhere on those isles. But this was very old. I don't know how ancient this particular lifetime actually was. There was no written history of this particular one. So it was at least a few thousand years old. I don't necessarily know if it predated the ancient Mesopotamian one. I get the feeling that it was after that, at some point after that in time and space. Forgive me, I couldn't pin down an actual date for that one. But with that lifetime, I remember having red curly hair. It was very vibrant. And I was a high priestess of this culture that I lived in. I existed in a small tribe of sorts. It wasn't a huge community. We had huts, tents, and it was very pagan. But again, not unlike modern day tantric, or even ancient tantric methods of living life. What the main religion of this life, it didn't necessarily, I couldn't give you a name behind it other than just identifying it as pagan, but it really focused on how eggs with an S, eggs was like the power of creation. That was the foundation of life itself, and how with fueling that creation and creativity, we were able to use that as the foundation of understanding life itself and what we are here embodying throughout life, in that culture, in that civilization. So I have a cheeky little nickname for it, but again, I don't want this video to get taken down, so I'm trying to see, how do I say it? It's like, I call it the pagan eggs life, the pagan, yeah. It was, again, it was like eggs with an S was the center focus of the religion of that life, of that practice. And so there was a priestesshood and a priesthood. There was a female faction and a male faction. Not everybody in the community were priests and priestesses. It didn't exclude anybody necessarily. It's just a matter if they felt called or had tendencies to work with energy very intentionally. And for me, I recognized in that lifetime I had extrasensory capabilities early on in that lifetime. I could see spirits, I could interact with them. That was just part of my being. And many others could too. Again, like, this was a very different culture that ultimately didn't repress very much. So people's innate intuitive gifts often weren't suppressed. And so a lot of individuals there were able to access that. Was that like everybody? No, not necessarily. Everybody could, but there were a lot more intuitive tendencies that would come forth for the people in this tribe, in that culture. And so for me, um, I remember being a high priestess for this, and it was very intriguing because there was this sense of reverence again for the work, sense of like understanding what eggs with an S really meant, like what it really has the power to do. And I embodied it fully. And for me, when I was first recalling this, I was a bit blown away because I admired that so much, but had experienced time and time again in this lifetime an imbalance or different sorts of traumas around sexuality. And to see a non traumatized state of that from that lifetime was mind boggling to me. I was like, oh my gosh, it can be done. It can exist. People can live in exalted sexuality and not impact like their quality of life. That was incredible. That was just the culture. There was no repression. It was completely open. In comparison, especially to modern day Western culture, it's like, oh my gosh, there is so much repression going on. That's something that so many people are still working through time and time again in this life that I see, even with clientele, all across the board. So to remember a time where that wasn't the case, it was very cathartic for me. So further with that lifetime, I remember teaching others various ceremony, various different ways of practicing this with harmony. And basically I taught people about their sexuality and having that be a huge component of like just teaching people how to navigate that. And another aspect of that life, which was fascinating for me, was how I was interacting even with spirits. And this might be a little out there for some people in their beliefs, but because I was an extra sensitive and I was able to communicate with spirits, that didn't exclude them from the practices either. So there was some interesting channeling and embodiment that was going on with working with actuality with spirits there too. So that was different. That was very intriguing to observe. But nonetheless, I still remember the training behind that was just bringing harmony behind it all. And it seemed like I got it on with everybody there. It seemed like that was just what was, that was the way it was. There was a lot of like me offering teaching to people on what to do, how to do it. And that was acceptable. That wasn't a taboo at the time. And it wasn't without its challenges at points. But again, because I had so much knowledge and empathy for it to offer to the community, it was interesting that I could hold space for others, but also recognize when they had imbalances is what I want to say. So, for example, this tied into one particular interaction I've had has tied into this current lifetime. A few years ago, I was doing readings at a metaphysical shop locally to me, and a new client came through the shop, and they hadn't gotten a reading with me prior, but they decided like, hey, give it a shot. They sat with me, and it was a male, and he started to open up about issues around his sexuality in this lifetime and different traumas around that he was hoping to help clear and relieve himself of. And I did that one session. He was very happy with the advice I gave, with like what the messages that were coming through in the reading, how I was able to offer support for him in there. And he really loved it. And so he asked us like, how often can we do these sessions? And I said, like, as often as you like. He's like, can I come back next week? Same time, same day? And I'm like, yes, let's do this. So he had booked another session. He came back the next week. And I started to recognize that, like, as we were processing stuff, and this is becoming more than just a reading, but this is becoming therapy, I was offering what I was perceiving, like, I was giving him my insights. But eventually I started to kind of feel that he wasn't exactly listening to me as much as he was just starting to love that I was holding space for him, which that's not a problem in and of itself. But at the time I felt like, oh, he's not hearing me. He's not actually going to do the work that I'm recommending. He's not actually going to apply himself to actually heal this. I can't be the thing that is the healing. Only I can offer support so that others can choose that healing for themselves. So he eventually, after that second session, he decided to try to get a hold of me online, and he started pushing some boundaries. And I already knew he was basically fallen for me already, and this was one of those situations that needed to have firm boundaries in place, like just a client facilitator connection here. And I'm not crossing any boundaries, but he was pushing it a little bit. So I ultimately, before our follow-up session even came back in another week, through various online conversations with him, I had to tell him, like, no, we are not doing this. No, we're not continuing to work together because you don't know how to actually do the work with me. And I tried to be as gentle about it as possible, but again, he was pushing boundaries with me. So eventually I had to tell the crystal shop that I was working at as well, that I'm no longer working with him. Please do not let him try to book another session with me. If you see him, you gotta, I don't know, either redirect him or however we need to go. And I essentially at that point was not feeling safe. And I ultimately came back to another meditation where I revisited the same past life that I'm still sharing, the pagan one, and found he was a part of that past life. And why I was feeling, even though things didn't escalate severely in this lifetime, I recognize why I felt unsafe with him in this lifetime and what his role was in that past life. He basically was one of the, so again, tiptoeing around this carefully for the sake of the platform this will be shared on. But in that culture, grape, without the G, grape was not a thing because there was essentially no repression. Sexual expression was encouraged. And so without the repression of it, grape without the G was not a thing that was experienced, at least not by most of the people there in that culture. There was basically a concept of like free use, where there are certain people that as a priestess could elect to offer that. It's like basically saying, okay, hey, everybody understands this is kind of a rule of thumb. If Joey there wants to get with Sally, but Sally says, no, I'm not available, Joey knows where to go to get his needs met, and someone in the priestesshood is usually available. And there's that idea, is like no matter what time of day, no matter when, it's like the tent's wide open, essentially. It's like anybody can come in if they need the services. And I recognize like I had that available. That was a role that I chose. It was not forced upon me. In that lifetime, I chose that role to be of free use when it was called. And so this client from my current lifetime essentially had a problem in that previous lifetime where it was, even though grape was not the appropriate word for it, he often found himself in my tent in not a well-balanced emotional state pursuing that. And so I knew how to handle it in that lifetime. I had the skills, I had the resources, I had the knowledge, so that it was not a problem on my part. But I could recognize, again, he was not in a great emotional space. In this lifetime, I'm not doing that kind of work. I'm not an eggs worker. So at this point in time, when I'm doing this reading for this person in this lifetime, and he came to me, and I was recognizing his emotions were not in the right place, it sent alarm bells through my consciousness, through my being. and put me on edge because I'm like, oh my gosh, am I going to re-experience something that I'm not prepared for? Ultimately, I coached myself and recognized that no, I'm not in the same place I used to be in. I'm not in that lifetime. I don't have to fear about that particular pattern repeating. I've done my work to create my safety. I've done my work to know myself and to know what I'm manifesting in my reality. And once I knew that and I was secure in that, I truly had no more issues around that person. To this day, this was several years ago, there have been no issues surrounding that. So I felt very good about like understanding what I needed to from that past experience and how it was impacting this experience, but it no longer had to impact me. So that felt really great to release that. Furthermore, within this past year, I've gotten really close and connected with other Tantra facilitators locally to me in my community that I admire, respect, and love that they are so open and willing to work with these practices so that people are less and less repressed in this life as often as possible. So, interestingly enough, though, I could recall that they were also in that same pagan lifetime and with various connections there. One of my good friends, Maiko Jaidevi, who he loves being promoted, so shout out Maiko. He's a Tantra facilitator here where I'm at, and he was, in that lifetime, a female, and he was one of the priestesses in the orders that I was in. And it was so fascinating when we began our friendship and started connecting that I was able to pinpoint that. I was like, oh my gosh, no wonder you do the work you do. You know the ways too. So it was so fun reconnecting in this lifetime. It feels very much like a family reunion in a lot of ways. And he's not the only one. There have been other friends that I've met through the Tantra community who also were a part of that lifetime. Another friend of mine was my little sister in that lifetime, and they are a male in this lifetime. So it's so funny how the roles shift or flip. So he takes it very well though, and he totally feels it and gets it too, and he lets me call him Sissy in this lifetime, so that's fun. Also, that same person, his partner in this lifetime, who is a female-bodied person, was our father in that lifetime. So that's also interesting, and she knows I got an ongoing joke with that, of calling her Big Papa as a result. So again, everybody is wonderful about like being open-minded to these, what I share with them when these connections become known to me. And there have been other connections further that stem so profoundly for me from that one lifetime. Joy Bliss, who you have, if you follow me on social media, have seen my collaborations with him. He was there with me in that lifetime as well, but he was a non-physical being. So he was one of the spirits that I interacted with often. And how we often would, how I would communicate with him was, well, psychically speaking, I would communicate with him, but also I would channel him, and I basically let him possess my body, but I knew he was a well-intentioned, positive spirit. So there was this sense of like oneness that we would experience together, where he was basically feeling what it was like to be a human. He was observing like, what is the human experience like? He was just fascinated from a non-physical perspective what that was. So very fascinating dynamic. And as we've gotten close in this lifetime, another pattern of ours in this lifetime is how we have to really be careful about when we're together, like maintaining our sense of autonomy so that our energies don't blend too much or we get enmeshed with each other too much. And we have a word for that with Joy and Lora. We call it the unconscious Jora when we're merging together. And when I was able to recall that dynamic of me, like quite literally letting him embody me, it was like, okay, makes sense why we're here to practice autonomy. Now that you have a physical body, you can walk in your shoes, you can walk your walk on your own. We don't have to blend that much. So interesting lessons to be learned all around. Before this video gets too lengthy, I think I will wrap up these stories for now. But again, please drop a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts, your curiosities, your questions you might have for me towards these stories that I'm sharing, towards these memories of mine. And share with me if you've experienced past life regression work yourself, if you have any other interesting reflections you'd like to share as well. But I'm open for questions, and also if you're curious to work with me directly, I'm located in St. Pete, Florida, so you can reach out to me and book a session. If you go to my social media page, I have a booking link, and I can't wait to hear more from you all. I love you all. Thank you for staying tuned with me through this telling, and we'll see how this leads into future videos. If you want any more stories to come through or any other reflections, I'd love to share my experiences. All right, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and have a lovely week. I love you all. Bye.